Okay, welcome back everyone. So we'll start this morning with sonata form. I've got some on-screen notes for you here, and I've also got the annotated score, the score that I will annotate to the first movement of Beethoven's Opus 13 Pathetique Sonata. But we'll start here with a couple notes first. So, sonata form. Sonata form is often kind of the climax of a of a classical form class because it's such an important form for a lot of classical Viennese composers, and it's probably one that you're already kind of familiar with. So we'll look at some different ways that sonata form manifests in this sonata by Beethoven and compare that against the kind of typical sonata. I want to map out the more kind of typical kind first here. So normally a sonata starts with an exposition that is followed by a development and a recap. Each of those things have more stuff going on inside them though, of course. So within an exposition we get a main theme that I will probably abbreviate MT. We get a transition. Our main theme is in either the major key tonic or the minor key tonic. The transition modulates. The secondary theme is either in 5, or if we're starting in a minor key, then it would modulate to the relative major. Then we have a closing theme, which I will abbreviate CL like that, or something like that. The secondary theme can actually be one of many, and let's just add one thing. It has to close with a pack in its relative key. The main theme can close with any cadence. Well, I shouldn't say any, with PAC, IAC, or a half cadence. Let me do the thing I like to do with the drawing and just put a little, like a bar line here. Okay. In the development, we get sometimes a pre-core. This is optional. And then sometimes we will get a core of sequences. That is the main thing that happens in the development. Somewhere between the development, and I'll put it down here in this area, we get what we call SOTD, standing on the dominant, and a big half cadence, because that's preparing us to come back for the recap. Oops, oh. It's okay, I thought this might happen. So the theme's from the exposition, but in the tonic key. And we could draw a similarly kind of big line here, because typically there is one. Not necessarily a big bar line like a double bar, but typically there is some kind of very clear-cut moment when the recap arrives. Now, this is like the very kind of most stereotypical, or you might say paradigmatic sonata. Are there exceptions to this? Of course. Themes can come back in the wrong key. Or you could have a false recap where the main theme comes back and it's actually still part of the development. Or you could have a time when Beethoven in particular in the recap likes to have themes come back. He'll have the secondary theme come back in the mediant key instead of the dominant or something like that. So things definitely happen. Or weird stuff might happen in the exposition that's then sort of resolved in the recap. Of course, all of those are things that can happen. That's not something we're going to worry about for right now. Now, this Beethoven sonata, I'm going to post a link to a recording of it, and I will expect you to have listened to it before you get into this analysis. I don't want to get dinged for a copyright. So I'm going to ask you to listen to that on your own instead of including it in the video. And I also am not going to try to play it, at least not all of it. So this sonata, however, is interesting. You might have noticed this. This sonata has a slow introduction. That's what's going on here. Again, if you have not already listened to it, go ahead and hit pause on this video and go listen to it. Notice also Gevidmet here is pointing us toward the fact that it is dedicated to this person who probably helped pay for it. So this has a slow introduction, which is something that sonata forms can have. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to write that here to show what's happening. And then we don't actually get the beginning of the exposition until after all of this slow, stately introduction has happened. And this might sound kind of like a regal procession, but one thing to keep in mind also is that this sonata is nicknamed pathétique, which, as you can see the way it's spelled, means something more along the lines of pathetic, but not the way we use that word in English. Pathétique here means more like pathos and emotion and huge romantic contrasts. And so that's sort of what we're going to get, a lot of big, if you can see already, like big dynamic contrasts, big range extremities on the piano, big gestures, really fast and chromatic and dramatic gestures. Okay, so here's where we actually begin our exposition, which I'll label like that. And then I'm going to use another label here to show you where the main theme starts, but I'm going to make this just a little smaller to show that we're talking about different kind of levels within the form. So there's our main theme, this big pedal in the left hand as the right hand has a big chromatic ascent. It will probably help you to listen to this multiple times, probably while we're while I'm talking through it. You might want to have that video up, and also then when I'm done, it would definitely be good for you to go back and listen to it again. Okay, so there's our exposition starting. Here's where our main theme happens. We're looking for the main theme to end with any kind of cadence, which you might have been able to hear. Now the thing is with the cadence here, it's not going to be a huge pause in the texture with this half cadence, but it does land on 5 in the key that we're starting in. And so just to be clear, we're starting in C minor. We won't label a ton of Roman numerals. If you want some practice with Roman numerals, you're certainly welcome to work through them here, and you can send it to me and I'll give you some feedback. But for right now, of course, that is a big land on 5. But it doesn't move right away to the transition, I think, because we just have this extension of that cadence. This is all, in a sense, like an expansion of the dominant, just kind of hovering around 5. As you can see, it comes back a couple of times. And then finally, I believe that our transition starts here. Now, I will also say that I'm putting the transition here. You might find another analysis of the same sonata that puts it somewhere else. And the thing about sonata form is, and you know, continuing a thing we've talked about with the other forms so far this semester, that it's not necessarily going to follow exactly discrete kind of section divisions, and you might be able to analyze it differently than what I'm doing. Like, it might be somewhat subjective. That's okay. Anyway, here in the transition, once that starts, we get these, again, big chromatic moves up the piano. Da 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 da. Ba da ba da 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 ba da. Ba da 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 ba da. I don't have perfect pitch, as you can tell. And then we have a big contrast again. Now, here's our secondary theme. You might also have called it the subordinate theme. I'm going to add one to it. So spoiler alert, I think there's more than one over the course of this piece. What's wrong with the secondary theme? Well, look at what key it looks like it's in, or listen to it and see if you can figure out what key it's in. I think that this is in the key of E flat minor, which is flat, or excuse me, not flat anything, because it's already flat in the key signature, but it is minor 3 as opposed to major 3, because if you look back here, I said that if we start in a minor key, which we did, don't correct that, that the secondary theme should be in the relative major, and instead it is here in E flat minor. So Beethoven is playing with these things. By the time this was written, the people listening to it would have already heard so many sonatas that they're like, okay, I get it. So the idea is that he's messing with the form because that just would have been more entertaining and more interesting for the people listening to it, probably in somebody's parlor somewhere. Okay, so we continue with that. We have a repetition of it, or kind of a variation on it. And it's not to say that there isn't any cadence necessarily in all of that time, but we do get a nice clear cadence here. Again, remember, notice that we're transitioning back to E flat major, which is where we were supposed to be this whole time. And that we get a nice clear cadential 6/4 starting there, moving to 5 here, moving to 1 here instead of minor 1. So here is our pack in 3. To end that initial secondary theme, I'm going to move this like there where you can still read it, but it won't be on the top, because here comes secondary theme number 2. So remember I said that there could be multiple secondary themes. Why don't we add that to the notes and just say sometimes multiple secondary themes. There are lots of other optional additional things that could happen. I'll just say C. Kaplan for more, because that book, the Classical Forum by William Kaplan, has a ton of other examples. All right, so here's secondary theme number 2, which is going to keep going. Notice that it looks sort of like a cadence might be happening here. There is a cadence, but it looks like we're just going to repeat the same of these like kind of quiet secondary themes in the new tonic key where it's supposed to be. So that might be a reason that you have more than one secondary theme if the first one arrives in the quote-unquote wrong key. And then notice that that's ending again here. Pack. P in that case stands for pack in 3. Notice that I'm still doing that thing where I'm labeling the cadence based on what key it's in. And then it looks like we get something different here. Anyway, you're welcome for my expressive singing. So here's where I think you could make a couple different arguments. I think you could call this secondary theme 3, or I think you could call this the closing theme. I would accept either of those from you. I think that later on, there's another cadence here. Let's note that first, maybe. We're going to close the whole exposition in this key, so that's fine. And then here, I would say this is closing, if not earlier. Like if you think that what's happening before is simply another secondary theme, which I would respect if you thought that, then when that closes, then I believe here we actually have a closing theme. It's very short. It's meant to simply get us to the cadence that is going to close out this section. And in any case, that is the end of the exposition. What happens next takes us to, or is, the development, which I call dev. Let's actually make that label a little bigger because that's one of the three main parts of the sonata. And the first thing, if you look back on your sheet, the first thing that I said might happen in the development is the pre-core, and that's optional. So the core of the development is going to be a series of sequences, and sometimes that's preceded by something else. It doesn't have a bunch of sequences in it. In this case, this does not count as a sequence because it is not a consistent enough pattern of models and copies. And it's kind of reminiscent of the slow introduction. You'll see that's where this material is kind of taken from. In which case, this would be, come back. This would be the pre-core, and I'll make this this label smaller again. So here's our slow pre-core, and then we immediately get into our core. And within the core, I like to label where sequences occur. You don't have to be very specific about what type of sequences they are necessarily, or where there are models and copies, but we can do that for the first one just for review, perhaps. I like to just number the sequences. So sequence number 1 comes over here. And how did I know that? Well, partly from listening to it, I know that I get this is a model. In a sequence, you're going to have models and copies, right? This model lasts from this first part of the core until you start to hear that material repeat. Oh, I really thought it would correct that. Let's try to write a straighter line. Nope. It doesn't like that. Okay, what if I do it with this one? There we go. Okay, so our model lasts that long. And again, I like to, you can sing along with me. I know it's silly sounding, but it's also good. For the beginning of the sequence, it goes da 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 da. Actually, we need to extend our model a little bit, right? All of that is the thing that is the beginning of the sequence. All of that is the model. And through to this beat. Here we hear that same ascending pattern start over. Da 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 da. So we would call that a copy starting over here. Again, it's not something that I feel like you have to do every single time when you and then notice that the pattern changes. In the right hand, we're going to just go back and forth a whole bunch of times. And in the left hand, we get that same ascending pattern. So here I like to say sequence, oops, be cool if we spelled it with an X. Sequence 2 starts here. So that's the beginning of the next sequence, and a new model that looks like it lasts until here, and a new copy, and a new copy, until it starts to kind of break down. Notice that these other ones just go ba-da, 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 da-da, 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 da-da. So that's a difference. So that's where we can say it starts, or excuse me, where the sequence stops. You might say that the sequence ends about there, and then overlapping with that, we get the beginning of something new. So here I would just write no more sequences at that point. And to me, this just looks like it's kind of transitioning down out of the core of the development. And notice that we get F, F sharp again, and to G, and we have this like very chromatic thing that hovers over this G pedal. And G, of course, is 5 in the key that we are going to, the original key of C minor, which means to me that this is a big 5 chord, or standing on the dominant. And I know that I didn't have room to write that out before, so I'll put it up here. Standing on the dominant. Okay, so that's going to take us out of the development. And sometimes they last just a bar or a beat. In this case, it lasts several bars. Notice you can see where the G pedal is still hanging on even later until the pianist gets to do this kind of show-offy cadenza-like gesture. And then at 195, we're back. So here is the recap. And I'm going to make that bigger because our other 2 big section labels are bigger. And I want it to look kind of on par. So here's our recap. That means that the main theme comes back. The main theme comes back, and in this case, it looks like it's in the original key, so that's good. That's where it should be. And we get a full statement of that again. We don't really get a complete statement of our transition, and so I just like to note if something like that happens. Oops, I forgot this will only go per page. When something like that happens, that we get the transition is altered. I like to just put that somewhere in my analysis as a label. In this case, we don't really get that same transition, because if we go back to the beginning, the very beginning of the exposition, here was what the transition looked like. It had these kind of tremolos in the left hand. Of course, we did hear that a whole bunch of times in the development, in the sequence, so maybe he started to feel like, okay, you've heard it enough, you get it. But we do get those tremolos in the left hand and movement back down. And then notice here that 220 looks very much like the secondary theme that showed up. I'll jump back and give you a bar number. Measure 220 or 221 looks very much like measure 50 or 51. In this particular edition, they actually put the bar numbers behind the bar that they go with, which I think is very strange. But anyway, here's ST1. It was in the key of minor 3 before, and now it's in F minor, which in relation to C minor is 4. So still not in the right key. That's very weird. But then, just like in the exposition, this theme repeats itself. And so by the time we get back down here, notice this little clef is like easy to miss. Notice that here, when it repeats in the correct theme. So it's modulated back to where it's supposed to be by then. I'm giving it a little exclamation point to just sort of point out, and I'll even circle it to point out. Now it's where it's supposed to be. Okay, so we get ST1 in the correct key of C minor, because remember, if you look back at my notes, I said all the themes are back from the expo, but now they're supposed to be in the tonic. So we wanted it to be in C minor, and finally it is. And notice that the secondary theme also comes back. Oops. Whoa. In the correct key at this point. Let me do like that. There we go. So there's our secondary theme number 2, that soft one that is, by contrast, very quiet. And that shows up in the key it's supposed to be. Here is the final part of the exposition to return. We called this ST3 or closing because I said I could allow for it to be either one. If you had to press me on it, I would probably pick secondary theme number 3 because it does close with a cadence. And then I think there is for sure closing material after that, except that we don't actually get that again in the recap. So, closing material is missing. But notice that the slow intro has returned again. I'll move that over here. And so even though we didn't get the closing theme, now we sort of, maybe in place of it, kind of get this slow intro recollection. And then finally, in my opinion, what's happening here is the main theme comes back to actually do the work of the closing theme. So here's the main theme coming back at the very, very end. And then, of course, you get your final cadence in the last couple bars. And that is the story of this sonata exposition. And I've got another piece for you for our second, not just for the sonata exposition. That's the story of this initial sonata movement, which is typical of most first movements of most sonatas and also most classical symphonies. So in the second video this week, I'm going to do a Mozart piece. And I'll be back with that soon. Bye for now.